strange people on the internet. I am going to be working on my car. It's a perfect Australian day for it. It's about 400 billion degrees outside. I've got my Australian safety shoes on, and I actually have some slightly vague idea of what I'm doing this time. The previous couple of videos were totally chaotic. I had, some vague memories of doing things before, and I just kind of felt my way through it. And it just becomes absolutely unhinged because at some point I stopped caring about trying to move the camera around and show people what I'm doing and just trying to get it done. But now I've done that part of it, I have a bit of an idea of how to do all those things separately, and I can show you. So if you actually want to learn how to take the valve covers off and change the valve cover gasket or pull the headlights out or change your radiator, the next few videos will actually be able to show you that because I now have some idea of what I'm doing. So this will hopefully be a bit more helpful and maybe slightly less entertaining because I won't be breaking down into tears and giving up and all the rest of it. But this car will still fight you every step of the way. It's become very clear as I've done this that this car was always intended to sort of just be built in sub-assemblies and then not serviced in place. It was always meant that if you wanted to do anything on the engine, the idea was to drop the engine down. And, that's just the way the car is. Which makes things hilarious if you're an enthusiast, but it can be done. Just really painfully. Today, I'm going to start by showing you how to replace the valve cover gasket. And in this case, I'm not showing you how to take it off. You're going to have to work it out in reverse for watching me put it back on. Well, the filming on this is going to be really awkward because where I have the camera is where it's going to be best for me to be working. And that is also going to be the best place for filming. So wish me luck. To begin with, you remove your spare sheet that you've covered the engine with for the last few weeks. And this was just to protect the fancy bits from getting filled with dirt. So out of the way, and by out of the way I just mean on the other side of the engine bay. You might notice that there's a valve cover being put on. That was because I wanted to actually try for the first time in a while having something resembling a smooth video going through, so I did that one first and time to get this one on. It's still quite awkward, valve covers usually are, unless you've got a straight 6 or an inline 4 that's standing vertically. It's often quite awkward getting things through. But before we get started, let's have a look at what we're working with. This is our beautiful head on our engine. These are the wiring for the coils, some replaced hoses, a bunch of coils sitting in the valley, and my little 3D printed covers. And yeah, it's a very pretty engine. It's actually it's really cool. I know on the previous video I showed you down the ports and how that it's all, been machined and really cool, but let's go over a couple of other interesting things with this engine before we start putting it back together. So let's start down here. These are, I think they call them variators in Ferrari language, but this is variable valve timing. So this solenoid will change the oil pressure in here, and this will change how this rotates, which will change the position of these cams. Now, a really cool thing with these cams is if we come over here, the absolute insane ramp angle on these. I'm amazed that they idle, but at the same time, they will idle because of the advances in modern ECUs. This is why it's run on a MAF, and the valve timing can be adjusted to give it the best chance of idle. So it's actually really nice. And these are really small cams, presumably to help it rev higher because of the reduced mass. And they're counterweighted, which you don't typically see. I'm assuming that's a counterweight anyway. I think down the other end, that is for the cam timing sensor. But these, I think, are counterweights. I might be wrong, but it is definitely designed to rev high, probably quite a bit higher than what it actually does rev to. So quite interesting. If we come down here, I can tell that this engine hasn't been apart in any way since it was assembled. This little bit of gasket goop is the same for this timing chain cover as it was for the valve cover. So it was all installed in one go and left alone. I think in the previous video you should have been able to see when I pulled this gasket out, it was actually crunchy, which is why it had been leaking so much oil. It had just been ignored for such a long time, because it's easy to ignore an oil seep when it's not fully leaking and keeps getting bumped off to the next person, then the car is sold on 15 times and it just never gets done. And that's how come what is probably the best value supercar that you can get is the best value supercars, because the maintenance has been neglected on these so much. But before we get too into it, let's have a look at a couple of the more awkward things that needed to be done. In the previous video, I pulled out this piece of air line. This is all part of the secondary air system for the emissions. This is the secondary air pump, pumps clean air into the exhaust, I think, through these little ports down here for some emissions control, I think mostly during startup. This was really awkward to remove because it's, as you can see, it's quite busy around the front here. It wouldn't have been possible for me to get it out with the radiator in the way. It probably wasn't necessary to remove it to get the valve covers off, but if I come around this side, have a little look-see, you can see that this kind of overhangs where some of the bolts are, and it just would have made things difficult. Would have been easier it was just easier to pull it apart, basically. So if we so I pulled that all out and I've put it back in place, because when I pulled it out with the valve covers in place, it actually interferes with them quite easily at this point here. Again, coming back over here, you can have a look sort of through all the junk, and I scratched the crap out of them as I was pulling it up. So with one of them out of the way, it was a lot easier to get back in. It will make it a little bit more awkward to get the installation done, but after painting these and color matching them, which is a hell of a trick, I don't want to go through all that again. So I put this in place. I've taken the little valve piece off, which is over there on this one, and I'll get the hose out of the way, get everything in place, and then join it all back together, which will be the easier way of doing things. Another interesting thing that I came across is this little plug here. This is for the solenoid for the variator. If we come back over this side, you'll see that's where it pops out here, and I haven't hooked this up yet. It's just sitting there. So when I pulled these valve covers off, this was all full of oil in here, and I was really confused. When I unplugged this, this was full of oil, and it was very strange. How did all that oil get in there? So this one was the same, and what it is if we come down here, after many years of heat cycling, this shrouding over the wiring actually cracks. You might actually just be able to see it in there. This then fills with oil, and over time the oil makes its way up this plug and then comes out into the plug and eventually leaks into the valve cover, which is hilarious. So I looked up how much it would cost to replace these, and then decided that I can live with it, because they are hella expensive and they work, and the oil shouldn't interfere with anything. I did try to see if it was feasible to sort of de-pin this and get a bit of weatherproof heat shrink over it and just do that, but no, it's going to stay like that, and it will slowly leak 1 drop of oil every year or something like that. But if you are doing this, that is a really unexpected thing that you will find. Anyway, that's enough preamble and rant, so time to actually try and do something. Hello! So when we get started, we actually our first job is to get a razor blade, a little bit of cloth, and clean. So along this edge, you will have little bits of gasket goop. You just want to try and not get it into the engine. Don't stress too much if you do. That's what the oil filter is for. It's not a big issue. It's really only if you get hard things in like sand and little bits of metal that can actually scratch the parts, jam them, damage them that way. But for the sake of stressing out over some gasket, don't worry too much. But we just need clean surfaces because we have to put a new gasket down and we want it to seal and not leak. It's a bit hard to see on the camera, but on the back here there's some half moon cutouts, and there's often gasket goop on those on most engines. I noticed when I pulled this one's old gasket out, there's no goop, but I will be putting a little bit of goop on there anyway because it's a common spot for leaks to form when there's a corner. This is the most awkward part of cleaning. You do actually want to clean the surface with some solvent, usually a brake cleaner or a degreaser. This will obviously destroy the oil as it gets in there and contaminate it. You also have much higher odds of getting dirt and debris into the engine. Anywhere that you know that there is debris, like I can physically see it down here, you're better off spraying it onto the cloth and wiping it out rather than spraying it onto the surface. But areas where the surface is relatively clean or you know that it's going to go down, you can spray it on and just give it a wipe. It's also one of the reasons why you shouldn't change the oil when you're doing a job like this. You should run the engine, let all the oil flush through, and then change the oil at the end. So you can see I've picked up quite a bit of dirt and debris on the cloth. So I'm not going to use this because I will then brush more of it into the engine. And keep in mind, some of it is getting into the engine no matter how hard you try. It's just reality. Again, that's why you have an oil filter. But don't make it worse than it has to be. So I've cleaned up a chunky bit, and now I'll get another bit of cloth. Another awkward spot that needs to be cleaned will be on your exhaust. If you've gone and done what I've done, which is pull off the valves, you just need to get your razor blade on this and clean up whatever remains of the old gasket. Obviously a bit hard to film, but I'm doing my best. Anyway, just like you saw before, where you scrape the razor blade along the edge flat, don't dig it into the metal, and just try and clean it up. You can see I've started lifting up what's there on the old gasket so that there's a clean mating surface. With everything clean, there's one other thing that I should have pointed out before we got started, and it's actually the condition of the cams. On this car, you'll notice that there's not even visible scoring, and that's really interesting because this car's quite high mileage. I think it's about 130,000 Ks now, and I'm pretty confident it has been neglected pretty much until I bought it. Normally when you pull out an engine with half this amount of mileage, you'll see visible scoring, but you won't be able to feel anything as long as the engine's been oiled. And the reason that this is the case is that these engines actually store oil pressure in the head. Underneath here, this fitting here, there is a pressure valve. So if you remove this piece here, there's a filter, and then underneath that there is a valve. I think to get access to the valve, you actually need to remove the cam covers for the variator, which is this whole section here. So when you're doing this work, look at the condition of your cams, and if you see any signs of wear, that would be a very good indication that the one-way valve that maintains the pressure in the head is gone, because what it does is it maintains oil in the head so that it doesn't drain down. On a normal engine, that really doesn't matter that much, and it really doesn't matter that much on this engine either, except that people don't drive these a lot, and I suspect that when the Fiat Group was designing the F136 engine, they were probably aware that these would be sitting around for a while before they get turned on, and they put that valve in there to make sure that there was going to be oil in the head at all times for cold starts. So, yeah, if you have really bad rattling on the hydraulic lifters at startup, and you open this up and these are starting to show signs of wear, there's a pretty good chance that you're not maintaining any oil pressure when the engine is sitting for a while, and in there will be the culprit. Fortunately, my cams are in excellent condition, so I don't need to go pulling things apart. I think this can be done without undoing the belt tension, but I haven't looked into it because I don't need to do it, and that's one less thing I need to do. With everything cleaned, I can now actually progress to getting the valve cover installed. Before I did that, however, I actually repainted it, and I have to clean off all the old paint, spray it with a wrinkle coat, and I used VHT because it's the most available one around, but you can use pretty much any wrinkle coat. The problem with VHT is the color isn't even vaguely close to the Maserati red. It looks almost orange compared to this. So I actually had to do a kind of mixed painting where I spray it with the VHT paint and then another enamel paint in light layering so that I don't lose the wrinkling and that I can get the color correct. So it's actually a bit of an ordeal. But in terms of getting the wrinkle paint to work, I have another video. I actually think it might have been the first video that I did with my video editor, Jacob. Jacob's a great guy, does all the video editing. And I'll link that around, and you can see how much of a pain in the ass it is to actually redo wrinkle paint and get it to wrinkle. But these came out really well, so I'm looking forward to getting these back on. The whole engine bay is going to look really nice when this is done because there's a few other little goodies which will be going in there. Anyway, time to dress this up with the gaskets and get everything ready. Step one is actually making sure you have your gaskets. I bought these several years ago when I bought the car, knowing that it needed to be done, and have only gotten to it now. These little ring bits, they go over the center of your valve cover for your spark plug holes, and this gasket is specific to the left side and the right side. They're not even mirror images of each other, they're actually completely different. So, with everything clean on both surfaces, this is clean because I've cleaned off all the old paint and then repainted it, so no need to go into any special effort on that. Just put all the gaskets in place. And I will do all of this on an old sheet because the amount of effort to paint that, I don't want to damage it. But if we have a look at this gasket, it's got channels on it. There we go. Old phone doing all the heavy lifting again. You can see that it's got these indents, and they will actually fit into this groove. So this valve cover is actually one of the easier ones I've had to do. I found that it actually holds the gasket in place relatively well, whereas I've done them on my other cars and they don't really stay in place, but there's actually quite a little bit of pressure required to press these in, so they do want to stay in place, which made it a lot easier to install on the other side. But there's a few extra things in the way on this side, so I'm sure it'll fall out several times and upset me, especially while I'm trying to film, but we will find out. So I've got this AC line over here to avoid, and this time I have this secondary air system to avoid, so good times to be had. With your gasket all pressed in place, if you're an amateur like me and you don't do this all the time, it's not actually a bad idea to just try and get a feel for how hard it is going to be to install. The answer is it's going to be very hard, but especially because I'm filming it, and you know, fate knows that I'm filming it now, so it will be much more difficult than I want it to be. So I just got to try and figure out the best place for everything. Alright, this is the problem child here. So I need to get that closer to its actual fitment position, which is lower. So I will do that by actually locating it where it's supposed to be. I'll keep it loose and see if I can get enough movement. Okay. Little practice run, not too bad. So, time to pull it back out and do the actual run. So these gaps here cannot be sealed by the gasket because there's a low point. So you have to actually use just a gasket maker. You don't need to use any of the special high temperature or high oil ones, just a standard gasket maker over here in Australia. I think that's Permatex Grey, which is what I'm using. So I'll put a little dollop here and on the corresponding low side. And these are the half moons I'm talking about. I'll also be putting it... These are the half moon pieces I'm talking about as well. I'll be putting a little dollop in the corner, but on the head. So I'll have to film that with my phone as well to try and show you what I'm talking about. Doesn't need to be a lot, just needs to cover the whole split. Have a rag handy cleaning up. So you can see the little half moons here for the gasket. A little bit of goop on my finger already. I'll just try and show you what I'm doing as best I can. And just a little bit of it on the corner there, so that when the gasket meets the corner, it gives it a better chance to seal. So there's these 4 little points there to do. With the goop on, it's time to do this for real, which is when it will go wrong. Don't stress too much about how long it takes. You're better off getting the placement right. The gasket goop will be fine to be compressed for probably over an hour. So just take your time, get the positioning correct. Don't forget to pull your varied solenoid wiring through, because it'll be far more difficult when it's bolted down. I can't show you, but the gasket has slipped out the back, which is definitely something to be expected from the movement and the things in the way. And sometimes you just have to do this job by feel and just try and press everything back in as you go. Unsuccessful. Gasket has slipped off too much. Need to try again. Because this is a slanted engine, you actually want to hold it in lightly from just the top position before you progress, so that you can inspect it and make sure that the gasket is in the correct place. So that's just enough to hold it in place. It doesn't slide around. So now, time to go through and inspect everything. So the first step is just to get your fingers, make sure everything gasket-wise is where you expect it to be, which it feels like it is. Then the second step is to grab a mirror and actually see if you can see any issues. So after a little adjustment, everything appears to be in the correct place. This is very difficult to show on camera, but if you can just see in the reflection, you can see how, because the gasket isn't clamped down, you can see the little channel poking out, but it is in the correct location, so as I clamp it down, it should all locate correctly. So I couldn't live with all the corroded hardware after doing all this, so I've gotten new 316 stainless steel hardware. And what I'll be doing is going around to the 4 outermost points and tightening them down, and then checking the gasket again. This is why I had this thing out of the way originally. With everything cinched down hand tight, it's time to just do another inspection with the mirror and my fingers and just make sure that the gasket hasn't moved out and is located and is pressing into its seal. It feels like it is, and it looks like it is, so I'm happy with that. No need to wipe up the excess, just a vanity thing. With this now held in place, the next thing to put in is this. This is part of the secondary air system, a couple of new gaskets. Get it held in from the bottom, and then I have to get the valve in place, because part of torquing this all down is putting a new bracket in there. It'll make more sense as I do it, just trust me. Like most of what I've done in here, it's all new fasteners. The old ones are just so corroded that I felt ashamed putting them back in after going to all the effort of getting this engine bay so pretty. And it will be pretty, I promise. Another really troublesome thing to film. You can see that I've put a split ring washer in with the new M6 hardware, new gasket, and I will have to line that up and torque all that down. And this piece here can rotate and is a flex joint. So I've got to get all this in place before I can start tightening in the valve cover. So this little bracket here is why I had to get that little piece in place, is because the top half of that bracket sits on top of this, and this sits on top of the valve cover, and if it's not there, then you can't tighten the valve cover down. So yeah, definitely a little puzzle, but not an unsolvable one, just an incredibly irritating puzzle with no redeeming features, except emissions. And being able to breathe is good, I suppose. Just getting that in place so it doesn't move around. And then I can tighten more things in place. I'm trying not to release the tension on this so I can film it and show you, but that was really awkward to get into place. With everything now located and checked, it's time to do basically just a crosshatch pattern of torquing everything down. So with everything pulled through, this is what holds our cam piece in. So with everything pulled through, I'm now resorting to the phone again to just try and get a clear shot of how this goes in place. Probably won't be able to get enough pressure on it to put it in, but just so people can see. There we go. So these can be a bit awkward to remove. Usually a flathead screwdriver is enough, which may actually be what I need to push it back down, but we'll see if I can do it one-handed so that I can show you. Yay! So that's that. And with this, if yours is like mine and it's full of oil, just some electrical contact cleaner in a spray pack will be enough to get it all ready. But with that done, that's everything ready to start reassembling this. So time to just make it through. This may be a bit hard to see on camera, but this is actually a tapered fitting. So just clean it out with a wire wheel, that's sufficient. And then screw it in by hand until it's tight. And it will self-seal against the aluminium. That's all out of the way. So I can tell it's getting tight there. And this is the hose that it lines up with. So just need to bring it around till it's facing the right direction, which is going to be awkward and need a bit of leverage, which it's almost there. Just a little bit more. Might need a bigger Allen key. There we go. This is another one of those funny curiosities about this car, is that this is just the crankcase breather. It actually just runs back around to the oil reservoir for the dry sump. And yet, it is a very over-the-top welded aluminium setup. This kind of piping is normally used on power steering or air conditioning. I have no idea why they would do it like this instead of just a pipe to a T-piece and then, you know, just some clamps to hold it in place, which is what they do anyway. When these bits of rubber go bad, which these ones are fairly close to doing, the whole thing is scrap anyway. But I think maybe because it looks cool. Anyway, it's still useful, it's still rubbery enough to get a bit more life out of it, so no need to bin it yet. This is a cinch clamp, and these are easy to find. You can find them on eBay and plenty of different types of parts suppliers. And this is what was used originally. Only reason I'm sticking with them is mostly for cosmetic, because they match most of what else is going around. There's a few places where I've used worm clamps just because they're easier, and for whatever reason there may be access required there again in the future. In this case, I shouldn't be taking these valve covers off again for a long time if I've done this right. So the cinch clamp will do. You need a special set of pliers to apply them. So these are the cinch clamp pliers, and the cinch clamps originally that were there had these underneath it. They're kind of like a load spreader. I'm not sure what the proper name of it is, but they basically, you put them under the cinch clamp and then over the hose, just so that the cinch clamp doesn't bite into the hose as much. So this should be the right size, or do I need to get the next one up? That's the correct one. So the cover goes on, or rather I should say, cover goes in to the cinch clamp, spreader, whatever. Click. And this all goes over the hose, which then goes over the fitting. You then get your pliers and you just squeeze it. And that's it. Down the back here, there's a cover that I have no idea what the purpose is for, but just time to tighten that in. So that's it there. They just have a little copper seal on them. I think it might be some kind of inspection hole. Doesn't seem to serve any real function other than keeping the oil in, so time to put it back. Don't have a torque value for this, but considering it's in aluminium, about 20 Newton meters is about enough to get a clamp on those compressible copper washers, so that's what I've picked. These O-rings are in pretty good health. I did check them. There's no cracks and they still feel quite rubbery, so I just clean them up and reuse them. Some brake cleaner. You just pull them through. If there's no cracks, if they're not leaving behind any black residue, which this one's not, then the rubber's still good to use. So don't spend money you don't need to. Just a little bit of lubrication before it goes in, and it will make it pop in nice and easily, which is always nice when you have an O-ring that you don't want to damage. And like everything else, brand new fastener. Time to start putting everything else back. One of the super nice things is how everything's labelled on these cars. It's just a nice touch. Definitely helps if I put the coils into the right positions. Time to start cleaning up some of these vacuum lines. Those injector O-rings are in pretty good shape. They may have been replaced at some point. They're in way too good a condition for the amount of mileage this car has had. Helps if you use the right part in the right place. There we go. Some of the more astute observers may notice that the color scheme is slightly different with my valve covers than what it was when it came out. But there's a reason for that. There's actually a couple of reasons for that. The first is that painting this gold, again, I think Maserati call it champagne, is actually really difficult because you need to do a wrinkle coat and then overpaint it because you can't get that color originally. The second is that I never liked that color. And the third is that this is the color that was used on the Trofeo race cars. So I think that it just suits more, plus my car's black. The champagne color just doesn't fit. So black it was for ease, homage to the race cars, and I like the way it looks. But I'm getting onto the home stretch now, so not much left to do. And this is this little bracket here, this little nightmare, is the retaining bracket for this boy. And you can see that it's got very badly deteriorated foam. I've already taken the old foam off the top half. Now I just need to get this bottom half redone and then put that back in. So this is an interesting piece over here. I've said before that these are basically just kit cars, and this is one of those examples. So the whole issue that kicked off all of this in the first place, which was the busted radiator, I went down and I showed how that is basically a kit car radiator that's, it's come from a few different cars and it's been glued together. Well, it turns out that there's other parts on the car that are like that, and the same goes with Ferraris from this generation, and this is one of them. If you have a look at these two little pieces here, this bossed bit, they're from a mount that would come out here and get mounted in an Alfa Romeo, and on this car they just cut them off to make the part fit, and that is how they got it here. So yeah, that's just one of those things that they did to make these cars work. So and they do it on Ferraris from this period as well. You'll find heaps of stuff like that if you actually go digging. But I don't know if they still do it on the modern cars. I suspect they probably do. There's probably a whole bunch of stuff, if you know where to look, where it's literally come from another car and they've just kind of made it fit instead of, using it. And that's what this is. This is something that they got and they were like, no, we'll make that work. And they just jam it in there, and that's it. That's how you how that gets placed. Anyway, some new mounting tape. Keep it nice and snug. And time to screw that back down if I can figure out where I put the screws. It's amazing how much time when working on a car is spent looking for where you put something down that was literally just in your hands a moment ago. It is crazy. I found them, so crisis averted. Just time to screw it all in place. Now to do something I don't normally like doing, which is I'm going to put a bunch of stuff in that I know I'm going to have to take out later, but you'll see why really shortly. So this piece is the source of a lot of idle issues. since as it progressively fails and it'll crack and let a lot of air through. But that's why I've got a new one. So it's only being soft mounted for the moment. So that's how that normally sits, but for the moment I'll leave it out since that's likely to fall, and that'll just do. And for the first time in years, I'm putting the engine trim back in. All of this will need to come back out again soon. I've already started filming some of the other work that's going on at the moment. But it's been so long since I've seen the engine look its best, and with all the paintwork done and the engine bay clean, I really actually just want to have a look at it for a little while and enjoy all the work that I've put in. So that's what I'm going to do. Well, there's still a lot more to do, but I just wanted to get it together to actually have a look at the engine bay being clean for the first time in a long time. And there it is. And I think it's worth it. It's actually getting me motivated to get the rest of it finished. Well, a few other episodes to get on with, including putting the radiator back and finishing the air filter box and a few other things coming up. But at least this is almost there. I've still got to go get a few more fasteners and sort out a few other small details, but it's getting pretty close. Anyway, stay tuned. There will be more coming up soon.